Hello everyone, it's 2:05 and we're going to go ahead and get started with our webinar today. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to join us. Today's presentation is the future of ArcGIS. It's evolving, and will you be prepared? I'll go ahead and take you through a little bit of housekeeping. As I said earlier, my name is Anne-Marie Houlihan. I'm just going to get us introduced, and then Jay Fowler will take over in a few minutes. But first I'd like to talk a little bit about housekeeping. Ideally, you've joined us on the link, but if for some reason you can't hear this and you also can't hear me talking, but hopefully you can read the screen and see that you can dial in on this phone number with the 415 area code, and then go ahead and choose that access code or punch that in, and you'll be all set. And know that we are recording this session, so anyone who's registered for this event will receive the recording. So let's talk a little bit about what we're going to cover today. People like to know the journey they're going to be taken on. So real quickly in the beginning, we're just going to introduce ROK Tech and what we do, and why you should view us as an authority. We're going to do a little time warp, and what that's about is really the evolution of technology in general and how that can help us look at the future of the evolution of technology. And then we'll get very specific into ArcGIS Pro, the functionality, and what's new. We'll spend a little time about mapping analysis in 3D. We thought it was important to show you the tools that are not yet available in ArcGIS Pro. And then we'll kind of shift a little bit to the art of what's possible when you virtualize your software and what those advantages might be. And then we'll do a quick summary of takeaways. We do have an offer from ROK Tech that we'd like you to stay on the line for and hear more about. And then lastly, we've got a lot of great resources of where you can go to find out what's happening with ArcGIS Pro in the future, so you can be resourceful and help yourself. So who is ROK Tech? It's a great company located in Charleston, South Carolina. They are proud to have been an Esri business partner since 1997. They are a Microsoft partner, and in 2010 expanded to cloud offerings and hosting of all kinds of software and solutions. And they have collectively over 50 years combined GIS experience. So these really are the folks who know GIS and know how to help it run well and know how to customize and how to do reporting. So specifically, they specialize in customized development for all Esri products, ArcGIS Server ASP, ArcGIS Online Specialty Partner. A ROK Tech product is called GoMaps and just came out with 4.1 with brand new functionality. We hope you'll take a look at that. And software virtualization. And our speaker is Jay Fowler. He has a background in media arts and GIS and visualization of data. And professionally, he had an internship at Esri, which was a great foundation for him to get started, and now 5 years with ROK Tech. And with that, I will pass you along to Jay, who is your very experienced presenter.
Hey everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to do the time warp a little bit and talk about some of the big changes and computing and technology in general. So we kind of wanted to start out with this little story. I don't know how many of y'all in the past invested in VCRs and Blu-ray players and DVD players, and nowadays how often do you use them? And the same thing goes for music. You buy all this expensive equipment and also the furniture to put that equipment on, and now the trend has gone to the cloud, right? Major paradigm shift in our industry. So if you knew, hindsight's 2020, what was going to happen in the future, do you think you would have invested slightly differently? So this talk is kind of about what's happening in the GIS world and the technology world in general to hopefully give you all a little insight and help you make informed decisions moving forward with those ideas. So like I said, we want to give you a glimpse of the future. We want to talk about how you can influence it, because you definitely can. How you can prepare for it. It's always best to prepare as opposed to the knee-jerk, oh man, I got to get used to this today because we're going forward production full on, so it's always great to prepare. Also about how you can make sure you're investing dollars in future technology instead of the past, so that you are you know, doing the really cool streaming stuff instead of buying a used DVD player, and you know, just moving forward with those trends, which are very prevalent in technology, and I think actually more prevalent in other industries, but maybe are slowly working their way into GIS, and I think ROK can really help you move forward with those trends as well. So the future of GIS is great. There's a lot of opportunity, there's a lot of changes, and I think probably the main driver for that, especially if you're an Esri-based shop, is going to be a new piece of software called ArcGIS Pro. If I'm giving this talk in front of a room of people, this is generally where I like to say, hey, let's and see who's used ArcGIS Pro before. So y'all can kind of do this in your heads. And I'll tell you that if I'm giving this talk to about 30 or 40 people, I usually have maybe between 5 to 10 people raise their hands. And then when I say who's, you know, really used ArcGIS Pro in depth, a few of those hands go down. So I can tell that, you know, it's beginning to gain some momentum as a piece of software, but it's still in many ways by the market, and you know, that's to be expected, because essentially it's, you know, it's in its earlier life cycle, and I think we'll, you know, continue to see more and more adoption as features are added. So a couple things about ArcGIS Pro is that it is included with your existing ArcGIS license. So that's some great news, because you're not having to pay for new software. It's similar to ArcGIS Online. If you have a license for ArcGIS Pro, you can also use this piece of software, and you're going to do the licensing through ArcGIS Online. So it's another great time to kind of reflect and think about how much you're using ArcGIS Online. If you're not using ArcGIS Online that much, I highly recommend that you get into ArcGIS Online and you get your portal set up, and you get used to using that web application so that you can set up your licenses for ArcGIS Pro. One big difference between ArcGIS that Pro is much more project-centric. You know, you're essentially in ArcGIS for desktop, you know, you work in many different areas where you have geodatabases, map documents, toolboxes, and they're all kind of floating on their own. And in ArcGIS Pro, Esri's done a great job of kind of combining them more at the project level to make it easier to access the things you need for a project, but also to make it very easy to collaborate with other folks within your organization. ArcGIS Pro has an updated user interface, and one of the main goals from Esri was to reduce the amount of dialogues, because, I mean, as you guys know, what do you want to be doing? You want to be, you know, looking at data and looking at the map. And one thing about ArcGIS for desktop is that a lot of times you end up having some toolbox dialogue covering up your map. So that was one of the big goals of the updated UI in ArcGIS Pro. It's still a product to be used for visualizing, editing, and performing analysis on your GIS data. Nothing new there. It has, I would say, very much enhanced ArcGIS Online integration. I'll go into that in a little bit. One major difference in ArcGIS Pro is that it has 2D and 3D functionality, maps and scenes there, so 3D is going to be a big part that I hit on in a couple minutes. It facilitates multiple views that are interactively linked. When I say this, I'm talking about having two maps side by side, and when you pan on one, you pan on the other, and I'll get into that as well. So you still have geoprocessing, spatial analysis history, and tasks, so nothing too overwhelming there when we talk about migrating to a new piece of software. But one of the really cool things about ArcGIS Pro that you should be excited about is that it's a true 64-bit multi-threaded application. ArcGIS for desktop was supported on 64-bit operating systems, but technically it's not multi-threaded, and it's still technically 32-bit as well. So what this means is ArcGIS Pro can take full advantage of your CPUs, and it's going to work faster and be much more responsive. So that's very exciting. All right, so when we talk about functionality in ArcGIS Pro and some of the fundamental differences, one thing is in editing, we've totally gotten rid of editing sessions. So as we all know, editing sessions were kind of an extra step. Many folks felt they were unnecessary, and the folks at Esri did it as well, so they've totally gotten rid of it. Instead, what you have is an Edit tab on the ribbon user interface that I'll go into in a second. And it's going to allow you to edit features that you have the permissions to edit. You can also disable yourself in the contents pane so that you can't just edit everything, because that obviously scares some people. Another huge add-on when talking about editing in ArcGIS Pro is group feature templates. So what this does, it allows you to create a set of new features using existing feature templates. For example, if you want to create a water service line, ArcGIS Pro can automatically add fittings, valves, and hydrants. So it's going to make editing a lot quicker for you, and just really build out what you can do with this application. So you'll still have to do your QA and QC on those points, but it just makes life a little bit easier when you're adding multiple features from different layers in your GIS. Obviously, another thing that's going to be new with editing in ArcGIS Pro is 3D editing. The reason for this, we didn't really have that in ArcGIS for desktop. So this is going to be very robust and provide interactive feedback as you edit. And what I mean by interactive feedback is that as you edit these features, you're going to actually see them being edited. So as you pull or extrude a polygon from the earth and create essentially a cube, you're going to be able to view that happening. So it's not going to happen after you hit go. It's going to be doing it while you drag those vertices. So very nice feature with ArcGIS Pro. And then, as I mentioned earlier, ArcGIS Online integration in ArcGIS Pro has come a long way, and there's a big reason for that. As you all know, ArcGIS for desktop existed before ArcGIS Online, so essentially ArcGIS for desktop had to be retrofitted to work with ArcGIS Online. Well, this is the first product from Esri that was developed after ArcGIS Online had hit its stride. So this is really cool for consuming and publishing services, and also for sharing those services and collaborating throughout your organization. Very cool feature when you talk about your web maps and how you can use them and bring mobility into your organization with applications that you spin off from ArcGIS Online. So that's very neat. Overall functionality, definitely prepare mentally for a change. Like I said, if you haven't opened ArcGIS Pro yet, this is a great time to go ahead and get used to it. As I said, we have a user interface change. The major part of that being, as you see up top on the slide, is that you've moved to a user interface tool. It's a modernization overall, and Esri's seeking to get rid of the dialog boxes, as I mentioned. This is similar to what we've seen in other softwares as they advance, such as Microsoft Word moving to a ribbon toolbar. And across the top, you'll also see that you have some tabs. So the tabs are set to make your life a lot easier. As I mentioned, ArcGIS Pro is very project-centric, so you can add on tabs for one project, and they're not necessarily going to carry over to other projects. This is a pretty big change for your hardcore ArcGIS for desktop user. As you guys know, we're all used to defining the interface and all the toolbars and extensions that we have floating around in ArcGIS for desktop, because it's sometimes really difficult to find them if you don't have them loaded onto your user interface. I know you guys might have a similar ArcGIS for desktop interface in mind, where it's just like a Godzilla of tools and extensions all over the place. And like I said, that's because you want them to be easily accessible. However, it is also kind of a mess because you have so many things on your interface. So with the project-based nature, you can only add toolbars that maybe you want to see for that project. And then another thing to bring up is contextual tools. So Esri's made it possible so that the tools shown on the ribbon interface are present based upon what kind of data you're looking at. So a really good example of this is if you don't have any raster data in your project, you're not going to have a tab for raster processing. It's just unnecessary. So this is a really good way to kind of clean up your user interface and your experience and make it much nicer for you. So that's going to be a big change. There's some terminology I like to go over as well. At the end of this talk, have a really good link from Esri. You can Google it if you just type in ArcGIS Pro and terminology, but you can have it from the end of this presentation. It's really cool what Esri did with this terminology webpage because they made a matrix where they're combining or comparing terminology from ArcGIS Desktop to ArcGIS Pro. And one of the really interesting things I noticed is that there's a lot of terms in ArcGIS Pro that don't exist in ArcGIS for Desktop. And what this tells me is there's a whole lot of cool new functionality to use, so that's really neat. Some of the general terms I like to mention in this talk, I've mentioned this one already, is scene, and generally that is just when you're showing GIS data in 3 dimensions. So anytime you hear scene, web scene, it just means you're looking at data in 3D. The ribbon is another term, as I showed you all up top, that's going to be a user interface change where you have core tabs, project tabs, and contextual tabs. A third term is the group feature templates that I mentioned earlier also, so that you can edit features from multiple GIS layers all at once. It really should make your life a lot easier. And then the fourth term that I like to mention and highlight and get really excited about is called the tasks. So I don't know about y'all, but myself going through the same repetitive GIS workflow, a couple times a week. It's pretty standard. And what the task will allow you to do is to record a series of steps. Some of them might be automated, some of them might be manual instructions that can guide yourself through this task that you do again and again and again. I think this is great for a number of reasons. First of all, I like to go on vacation, so I assume you guys might like to go on vacation here and there as well. And if you have a task that needs to be run while you're on vacation, this is something you can easily collaborate with in your office and hand off this task to somebody else, your coworker. Another great reason is if you're in management and you have some interns coming on board, you could set up some tasks so that they could get oriented with some data and some projects, and it would just help them walk through a workflow. So tasks I'm really excited about. I think that's going to be something very cool in ArcGIS Pro. So when we talk about a new piece of software in the future as well, like ArcGIS Pro, one thing I like to hit on is migration, right? It's great to open up a new piece of software, but what do I do with it, So you can do a lot of the same things that you can with ArcGIS Desktop. You have your toolboxes, your models, your scripts, your map documents, but as I mentioned, it's project-based versus MXD map document-based, so there's a subtle difference there. As I said as well, it's great for you to go ahead and get used to this new software, but there's something that's really important to know. There's no backwards compatibility once you start using ArcGIS Pro. So for that reason, it wouldn't be a great idea to move all your projects into ArcGIS Pro and really start hammering things and changing map documents and layouts, and then decide to move back to ArcGIS for Desktop, because you're going to lose all that work that you did in ArcGIS Pro. So I'm kind of saying, cautiously go ahead, start using ArcGIS Pro, use it for all the advantages it brings to the table, but there are definitely some map documents and projects that you might not want to move forward with yet because of the fact that you can't move it back into ArcGIS for Desktop. So important word of warning. Esri provides the Analyze tools for Pro. As I mentioned, you have those toolboxes and those models and those scripts that make your life doable, make your life a lot easier because they automate a lot of processes. Well, there are some differences, and you're going to need to use the analyze tools offered by Esri, and those tools will tell you if you have any issues and where you might need to make some changes. For instance, a personal geodatabase that's referenced isn't a data format that's supported yet in ArcGIS Pro, so the tools would tell you, hey, you need to correct this, maybe you need to switch over to like a file geodatabase, for example. ArcGIS Pro does not support ArcObjects and is extended through ArcPy and through the .NET SDK. So it's also a great time to consider what you want to do and some future plans if you have some custom functionality built out for ArcGIS for desktop. So what's really great about ArcGIS Pro? Well, you know, I've talked about some of these subtle differences and some cool things that are going to make your life easier and better in some ways as a GIS user. However, the biggest thing that I definitely want to hammer on is 3D. So I see this as essentially one of the biggest shifts in our industry because it's very much flipping the world on its axis, you know, so that we can see data in 3 dimensions. We've been collecting z-values for years and been able to do analysis essentially in 3D, but ArcGIS for desktop was never really built out to handle data in 3 dimensions. ArcGIS Pro has been designed specifically for this. So when we talk about mapping analysis in 3D, two things come to mind. So you have real-world visualizations, and this is essentially depicting the Earth as it actually, you know, is. For instance, trees and buildings and landscapes. And you can then do analysis and get views on how a skyline looks or how that skyline will look if you add some trees or add a new building, and will that affect people's views. And then you have quantitative visualization, so that's essentially depicting data values in 3 dimensions. And this I'm really excited about also. The main reason I'm excited about quantitative visualizations is because I think it's a really easy and intuitive way to depict data values. And I like to give this as a little example. You know, if you had some rain barrels across the United States and you notice that one rain barrel had a really tall bar next to it and another rain barrel in a different region had a short bar, it's pretty easy to interpret that the rain barrel with the really tall bar has received a lot more rainfall, a lot more precipitation. And I think that that carries over to novice users, that carries over to people who have never done mapping before in their life. It's just a really easy thing to interpret. That top picture right there depicts a hurricane as it moved across the Atlantic into the Gulf. And once again, I think it's really pretty easy to say, if I was in a boat, I would rather cross that hurricane where there's a short bar versus where there's a really tall bar, right? So that's something interesting as well. And finally, on the quantitative visualizations, it leaves other symbolization options open. So before, maybe you were showing hurricane intensity in color, so a red hurricane was very intense, whereas a blue hurricane, you know, was just a tropical storm actually. Well, now we can depict that hurricane strength in height in 3 dimensions, and we can save the visual variable of color to depict something else, such as precipitation. So a lot of very cool visualization options when we talk about 3D. Moving on, in 3D you have global and local scenes. The top picture on the slide is an example of a global scene. It's where the curvature of the Earth is important to see, whereas on the bottom picture there is actually a local scene. So you're not seeing the curvature of the Earth, you're more like in the city or town type zoom level, and that's the detail that you're displaying. Elevation surfaces are important, especially when we get down to the next bullet point of extrusion. Esri starts you off with an elevation surface known as ground. It's just kind of the default surface. However, you can plug in your own. That's always really important to some folks. And it's important when you're extruding features and when you're draping raster data sets over the Earth. So let's talk about extrusion a little bit. I have the PLP there. It's always points, lines, and polygons. It's like our lives, right, as GIS users. So what extrusion is it's actually stretching those points, lines, and polygons from 2 dimensions to 3 dimensions and how they interact with the ground or the elevation surface I was just telling you all about. We take that Z value and we use it to get into 3 dimensions instead of 2D like in the past. So when you talk about extrusion, you have various elevation types. So we have on, and that's like a tree is on the earth, it's on the ground, so we're going to extrude it from that ground feature. You have relative elevation types, where you have a known height, such as a GPS receiver on top of a building. You know it's 30 feet above the ground. And then you have absolute elevation types, so that's where you have a constant height regardless of the ground, such as an airplane as it flies. Moving on, when we talk about 3D and mapping, ArcGIS Pro uses illumination properties essentially to give that 3D scene a very lifelike look and feel. It's very neat stuff because you can essentially view a 3D scene as it would appear at dusk or at dawn versus high noon. So that's really neat stuff. And then finally, one thing I want to really talk about when we mention 3D is another product from Esri called City Engine. All the really cool, realistic city stuff you see is being done through City Engine, and essentially it uses procedural modeling, so rules and styles, to generate very realistic 3D cityscapes. With City Engine and ArcGIS Pro and 3D in general, this is where I see a lot of benefits for folks in planning, for architects, for engineers, and for construction workers. You can examine zoning designations. You can see building plans, building styles, what it will look like if we change trees, if we change the landscape, if we change the parking here, and then you can make really informed decisions. So I think this is going to bring a lot of value, as I mentioned, to planning, architects, and engineers. In Charleston, South Carolina, we have an architectural review board when you talk about the peninsula and the historic, beautiful homes. So I could definitely see how ArcGIS Pro and City Engine could be used so that you can depict these worlds and make decisions. This is the part of the talk where I like to give you another little word of warning. ArcGIS Pro is a really wonderful product, and it's still under construction in a few ways. The biggest is if you are a parcel editor. The parcel fabric tools are currently not available in ArcGIS Pro. It's pretty important to know if you're using the parcel fabric. And then a really other important one is map topology, data integrity rules. For instance, polygons can't have gaps or can't overlap. These tools are used every day to essentially make sure that our data has the quality control that it needs, and they're not ready yet. So a word of warning, Esri is working on it, and they definitely will be a very big feature in ArcGIS Pro soon, but hold your horses a little bit if you need to work on a project that specifically needs those tools. Continuing on, and I have a link for this as well at the end, the toolboxes on the left are completely unavailable in ArcGIS Pro. On the right, we have toolboxes that have a few tools that are not currently ready yet. I like to mention like conversion tools. Many are related to old formats such as EOs and coverages. And then data management tools, that's where you find a lot of the topology stuff that I mentioned one slide earlier. And also setting up like replication for SDE, which obviously is a more sophisticated, advanced piece of functionality that will be brought into ArcGIS Pro very soon. So important to know these things before you completely dive in. Okay, so this is where I like to change gears in the talk a little bit, because we're talking about the future of GIS and technology in general. So I've really been mentioning ArcGIS Pro a lot, but this is a great time to also talk about another big trend in technology, which is virtualization. It opens up a lot of opportunities when you use 3D, like I said, whether it's for those, folks in planning and zoning, architects and engineers, but there's also a lot of technological and processing challenges when it comes to 3D. And the main reasons, this software is showing data in a way that we really never have before. ArcGIS for Desktop depicted, very high-end graphics in 2D, and was already fairly resource intensive in some ways. So now imagine using a piece of software that flips the Earth on its side and is depicting 3 dimensions. It can really eat up some CPU and some memory and needs some advanced graphic processors to work. So these are some of the great reasons to talk about virtualization. I'll dive into that in a couple minutes. First though, what is software virtualization, right? Always important to start at the base. I like to say that software virtualization is where you take a piece of software and you install it on a server, and then that software is streamed to local machines. It can be streamed to one or many local machines, and folks on those local machines then use the software. It appears that the software is running off your local machine. It works in the same ways, but the software is actually installed and doing all of its processing on that backend server where it's installed. So that's very neat. It's accomplished through Citrix XenApp, Citrix Receiver, or VMware. So right now we're in a Citrix GoToWebinar. So obviously these folks do a lot of this kind of streaming service. So you can kind of think of GoToMeetings or GoToWebinar as a similar situation, except for the fact that Citrix Receiver is a much more sophisticated and very smooth and very cool experience to stream that software to your machine. And finally, ArcGIS Pro happens to be an ideal candidate for virtualization, and also is going to require some hardware upgrades to show the world in 3 dimensions, as we mentioned, just because of the resource-intensive nature of that. So once again, we are at a slide where I like to get a little, hand-raising poll in the audience, and unfortunately we'll just have to do that virtually. How many people play video games in this audience? Or how many people have a husband or wife or a girlfriend or a boyfriend who play video games, or maybe have kids who play video games? I think there's a lot of people out there that do. And oh cool, there's virtual hands raised. Oh, that's neat. All right, so we got a couple folks. Very cool. I didn't know you could do that. Very neat. All right, so yeah, so folks are playing video games. That's great. Well, I would just like to go ahead and say on behalf of the GIS industry, thank you. A lot of folks were, wasting your time playing video games or all that stuff. Well, actually, what gamers have been doing is driving the virtual 3D realm forward by pushing technology folks like NVIDIA to create hardware and graphics cards that can handle very sophisticated, advanced, and detailed 3-dimensional worlds. If you think about one-player games where you're walking around and doing crazy stuff, these worlds are getting more and more and more realistic. So what's really the difference between that and virtualizing data in 3 dimensions? Not very much. You might not be jumping around as much, and you might be making more real-world decisions. But the technology and the hardware to run and depict the world in 3 dimensions is pretty similar. So give yourself a pat on the back. I'll go ahead and say thank you for benchmarking and driving this industry forward. NVIDIA is pretty much the leader when it comes to graphics processors, and their Grid K2 is something that has kind of been at the forefront when talking about ArcGIS Pro and hardware upgrades you might need to consider in order to effectively run 3-dimensional data or effectively virtualize 3-dimensional data. And at ROK Technologies, we've been doing a whole lot of work to make sure our shop's ready to offer virtualization for this product in 3 dimensions. So, we're talking about the future of GIS. You can kind of see what's coming down the pipe a little bit. We have a great new piece of software, ArcGIS Pro, that's ready and coming out. It's very resource intensive when it comes to that 3D side of it, which I think for the most part everybody's going to want to use to some degree. I think some folks are going to use it more than others. But it's definitely going to require some changes in how you handle hardware in order to effectively run the 3 dimensions that you want to use. Hopefully you've used it a little bit and you're getting familiar with it. There's a chance that you haven't, and that's because we're all really busy people. And I totally understand. So my recommendations, if you haven't used it, definitely get into ArcGIS Online, set up your licenses for ArcGIS Pro there. And start getting comfortable and familiar with it. One big reason is you can actually shape the future of ArcGIS Pro still. This is an example I like to give because of the fact that a lot of times people say, no, I can't really have a big impact. Well, recently Esri has started to change some of the licensing model for ArcGIS Pro because they heard from a lot of their users that they didn't really like how licenses were being handled through ArcGIS Online. If you had concurrent use ArcGIS Pro licenses, once you essentially assign them to a named user in ArcGIS Online, they lost that concurrent check-in, check-out status. So Esri listened to the people, and they're now offering 2 licensing models for ArcGIS Pro, where you can do it through ArcGIS Online or you can do it through a traditional license manager installed on a machine. So it's a great example of how you can get involved and how you can shape the future of ArcGIS Pro. Giving constructive feedback and also getting your feet wet essentially and just getting used to the new product. As I mentioned at the very beginning of this also, you really don't want to be forced into making this change one day and getting into ArcGIS Pro and just having your whole world flip upside down. It's a lot nicer if you can slowly get used to a new product and see a lot of the advantages and start to use them than having to do it all in one day. So you can really lower the stress level, is what I like to say. When you consider, going ahead and getting used to ArcGIS Pro. And then, as I talked about the good old DVD Blu-ray player at the very beginning of this talk, you can really use this as an opportunity to think about investing in the future versus the past. The reason I say this is, as I mentioned, ArcGIS Pro and 3D requires a much higher end set of GPUs or graphics cards and hardware in general. So you can use this as an opportunity to kind of consider what you have running in-house and kind of consider the trends as well of technology in general and how a lot of infrastructure has moved to the cloud, and also a lot of managed services have moved to the cloud as well, so that you can avoid those expensive equipment upgrades and also expensive hires when you talk about hiring an individual to run a virtualization division versus just contacting folks who know what they're doing and are very confident and reliable with their service there. So I want to talk about some of the advantages of application virtualization. If you haven't really explored virtualization, there's a whole lot of reasons to do that. So essentially right now you're using GoToWebinar, and what this tells me is that you have a computer and you have internet access. So you could pretty much virtualize a very process-intensive piece of software no matter what machine you're using. So we talk about thin client workstations like a Google Chromebook. It's OS independent, so if you like using a Mac instead of a PC, that's okay. And if you just want to use a Dell that's not too expensive and you want to save a couple bucks, no problem there. You're not really investing in a beefy workstation anymore because all of your processing is going to be done on the back end. So when you run models and stuff like that, a back-end server is going to handle that versus your local workstation. And that does another really cool thing, because you probably want to use your workstation for some other stuff, whether it's emailing or maybe the Adobe Creative Suite if you dabble in Photoshop and Illustrator and stuff like that, you're now saving your CPU and your memory to do other tasks on your local machine. So this is a great way to make the most use of your local machine. There's a great argument for virtualization when it comes to management overall. I think if you talk to most folks in IT, they tell you it's much easier to manage one server versus a bunch of individual workstations, especially sometimes those individual workstations are distributed, you know, like across the office, or maybe your office is, you know, across town, you have a couple different offices, or maybe it's throughout a state or a region. This really easy to manage software updates, service packs, bug fixes, hot fixes, security at the operation system level. You know, this is a really good way to manage one server versus individual stations. And then one other really cool thing about virtualization is the ease of access you gain from doing it. So I don't know if y'all have heard of BYOD, bring your own device. It falls very well within that camp. You can access your software, ArcGIS Pro, ArcGIS for desktop, whether it's ArcCatalog or ArcMap. You can access it from anywhere on any machine with internet access. Like I said, if you have a Mac and you don't feel like working on a PC, it's not a problem anymore. You just have to have Citrix receiver. Another very cool thing is that you don't have to worry about VPN or remote desktop protocol. I don't know if y'all have ever been in the situation, hopefully not, over the weekend where you realize you got to do a couple minutes of work. That's always the worst. And you cross your fingers and you hope that you didn't shut your machine down, or that the janitorial staff or somebody didn't shut your machine down Friday night because you really need to RDP in. Well, that's not a problem when you virtualize, so it's a very neat feature. And then finally, you have the centralized storage of data and applications, and that goes back to the management of one server versus individual workstations. It's a really good way to collaborate throughout your organization, and also to have security in place throughout your organization, so that now you have a very easy scenario for securely managing and accessing data in one place. So specifically to ArcGIS Pro, there's a couple advantages to virtualization as well. The first is the licensing model I was talking about with ArcGIS Online. We have a kind of economies of scale play here. Traditionally, when you had the ArcGIS License Manager installed, they all had to be installed on their own server or machine. With ArcGIS Online's licensing model of ArcGIS Pro, you can put more users on one box, and this drives the cost down. So that's really exciting for you guys, the consumer. We can use these cloud servers and leverage high-end GPUs, CPUs, and the memory required to run Pro. And it's a lot more cost-effective to invest at a server level on GPUs versus local workstations around the office. And another thing that relates to that is the cost of upgrading perfectly good workstations. Whatever computer you're using right now, you know, maybe you just got it, maybe it's a couple of years old, but it definitely still has life in it. And you know, it's a very uphill expense when you talk about, you know, throwing new graphics processors into those machines or buying totally new machines altogether. And it relates back to kind of that never-ending upgrade cycle that I'm sure, you know, y'all are all familiar with this day and age in technology. So pretty much the breakdown when it comes to ArcGIS Pro. Currently, you know, you and myself, we use ArcGIS for desktop every day. ArcGIS Pro is designed to run side by side with desktop for now. There's a lot of cool new functionality in ArcGIS Pro that is not going to be introduced into ArcGIS for desktop. Stuff like vector tiles and things like that. You know, it's really the future functionality is being added into ArcGIS Pro. And that's where you're going to take advantage of that future functionality. So slowly, more and more of your time will be spent in ArcGIS Pro moving forward. So this is a great time, like I said, take it as an opportunity to consider, you know, the best way to make investments in the future. Obviously, you want to manage, you know, big data in a way that you can collaborate easily and securely. And you also might want to integrate your GIS with other software and virtualize other pieces of the software as well, such as Microsoft Office 360. So, you know, it's a very good time to kind of calibrate and take the pulse of the industry in general, and you know, take advantage of some of the cloud computing and virtualization trends that are going on. Currently, ROK Technologies is doing a lot of virtualization with ArcGIS for desktop, so we see this as a really good opportunity and way for folks to start getting used to the whole virtualization experience. So we would love to chat with you if you're interested in virtualization, or if you would like to see a demo of virtualization, because we can get you running really quickly and you can go ahead and start getting used to what virtualization is and also all the advantages that it can bring to the table when we talk about the future of GIS and ArcGIS Pro in 3 dimensions. So a couple takeaways from this talk. ArcGIS Pro, I really feel it's going to revolutionize our industry. It's going to bring a lot of new folks into the GIS conversation. As I mentioned, engineering, architects, folks that have kind of been on the periphery, I think are going to be front and center now, especially with all the 3D functionality, and it's going to kind of flip our world on its side. So we'll see everything in 3D now, which is very neat. It's definitely not too early to go ahead and get used to the new experience in ArcGIS Pro. I highly encourage you to do so. Be aware there are some limitations that I mentioned. Some tools are not totally ready yet, the parcel fabric, topology, stuff like that. There's no backwards compatibility. Don't get too deep in ArcGIS Pro and try to move back to ArcGIS for desktop on a project. Might not be ready for prime time on some of your bigger production projects. Definitely a great tool to go ahead and get used to, because you're going to be using it more and more as we move forward. And then I like to throw in this quick little story at the end. As I mentioned, ArcGIS Pro is a perfect candidate for virtualization. We got confirmation from the big man when we were at the Esri Partner Conference. It's really neat. Jack Dangerman comes around and talks to all the partners for a couple minutes, and he likes to kind of see what everybody's doing. And he came by our booth a couple months ago when we were at the Partners Conference and said, you know, what are you guys up to? And of course, the first thing we said was 3D and virtualization of ArcGIS Pro. And he stopped and he immediately looked at us and he said, we designed ArcGIS Pro to be virtualized. So I just thought that was so cool, and it just resonated with all of us at ROK Technologies. So a neat little story there. And I am going to turn it over to Anne Marie now.
Thanks, Jay, and very nice job. I hope everyone that's listening has enjoyed this and found it informative. What we wanted to do is make a special offer for those of you who are attending to help you understand what your virtualization opportunities are. You know, we know that there are opportunities with Amazon and with Microsoft, and you may or may not be aware that there is an opportunity to do virtualization with ROK Tech. And so what we'd like to do is give you really fact-based, promise we're not going to always just recommend ourselves, but if you reach out to us with the promo code ROKVirtual and send it to info@roktech.net, we'll send you a questionnaire. It won't be too long, and it won't take too long to fill out. Once we receive your completed questionnaire, we'll present you with an analysis and a recommendation of what we think is probably the best path for you given your data, the types of software that you have, and you know, some other factoids that would help a person determine, you know, where should I go, and then at that point you can start to price it out and start to plan and budget. We'd like to offer you that kind of guidance as industry experts. So I hope you guys will take advantage of that, and email us at info@roktech.net and use the promo code ROKVirtual and just say I'd like my free assessment questionnaire. I'd also like to point out to you that we tend to do webinars about every month. And our next one, it's not on the calendar just yet, but it probably will be in a few days. The next one is going to be how to choose the best virtualization partner. So this will go into a little bit of depth about how we help people navigate virtualization partners. So if you're interested in that, please keep reading the newsletters you get from ROK Tech, because that's where we promote all our events and where we let you know what conferences we're going to be at, and then also, you know, the most recent content that we generate that by our industry experts. So that's all I have to say there. It's just the ROK Tech, ROKVirtual is your promo code. And if anybody has questions, you can go ahead and use the chat button if there's anything that you feel like hasn't been answered. we'll stay on the line for a couple more minutes and go ahead and address any questions you may have. So feel free to go ahead and use that in your dialog box right now. And as Jay had made mention, there are a lot of resources that he said that can be really helpful to you, and we'll go ahead and put them on this slide right here just to make it easy access for you so you don't have to go searching. These are tools that we found really helpful. And also you've got Jay's contact information if you ever have questions. He's only too happy to respond.